Hello.
Good evening, Graham. Good evening, Anthony.
Hello,
Recording is
Charles.
in progress. Well, welcome.
Mm.
Friday night, bird song in the garden. All very beautiful here in York.
It's terrible here.
Terrible hair. A
No,
bit
here,
harsh, I
not
think.
here. Terrible
Oh, sorry.
here. Terrible,
Mi-
terrible here.
Misheard. Well, back from Ireland in the beautiful mountains and lakes of Connemara. So, all
Oh,
loved
yeah.
up on Southern Ireland and what a stunning countryside and all that.
Knowing you, you were probably necking back the Guinness in huge quantities.
So, you know my characters so well.
Mm.
Guinness for strength. I'm just a weakling, I'm afraid. So,
I know
Graham,
you don't do Guinness.
no, I mean, I can't do any of these gorgeous drinks, unfortunately, but
Mm.
there we go. Now, Graham, it's we're going to start with the history of suits in rock music, which might seem an
Oh, wait
extremely
a minute! Quick
quick
interruption.
interruption. Got to go for it.
You know our conversation about AI and how AI may actually affect the
Yes.
arts in the future. Well, I just realised that the more sophisticated AI gets,
Mm.
you could put in the request to produce music by the Beatles. Now, AI would like delve so deeply into the characteristics of Beatles songs and the Beatles individually that eventually, if it kept on trying, it would come out with Strawberry Fields Forever.
You're convinced.
Yeah, I don't know what the point of that would be because it'd be a fake version of Strawberry Fields Forever.
But
Although
is
you'd be
this
able to
along the
tell
lines
because,
of if you gave a monkey a keyboard long enough, it would write Shakespeare's next play?
well, yeah, along much more sophisticated lines and complex lines, but the same basic theory. If AI is that good, and it will be that good, otherwise it would even get launched, it will eventually be able to produce its own genius masterpiece pop songs, which will be exactly the same as the existing ones, but you won't be able to tell the difference.
Well, some people believe already that Oasis were simply an AI version of the Beatles in the first place, weren't they? So
Not that good. I don't think.
not that good. Now, Graham, we're having I guess, a rock orientated uh, podcast this time, and we're going in
Maybe a
at
bit
the
of
deep
film.
end here on a really narrow subject, the history of
Yeah.
suits in rock music. Now, there is a corollary to this, saying brackets and seeing Interpol in Leeds last week. I am assuming that Interpol, perish the thought, may have been wearing suits.
Well, the New York City-based sort of post-punk band that came to sort of fame in Britain in the early noughties, although
Hmm.
one of the members is British. He's the brother of Ted Kessler, the ex-NME writer. But
Yeah.
anyway, when they came to fame in the sort of post-punky boom of 2003, 2004, 2005, I quite liked them. So I went to see them about 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
I have to say, apart from the album Our Love to Admire, which came out about 2009 or 2006,
Mm.
I do actually love Interpol songs because they got great atmospherics, a great mood, but they're basically a one or two song band.
Yeah, so the
But
Lake
when I saw
District,
them
great
about,
atmosphere, great mood, but they're not great
yeah,
songs.
but then when I saw them 5 or 6 years ago, my God, on stage with that moody atmosphere, they were all wearing these open neck, they're all wearing suits with open neck shirts in
Mm.
greys and blacks, and it just looked magnificent. So the suits really added to the atmosphere of the songs, and it made the gig much more enjoyable. So I went back literally about 2 weeks ago to see them at Leeds O2 Academy,
Mm.
and the whole show, for whatever reason, was bathed in dry ice and lights, usually a very deep red light. It meant you couldn't actually see Interpol hardly at all. You could sort of see faces poking out of the red gloom and the occasional bit of a guitar, but you could not see if they're wearing suits or not, which for me completely ruined the gig because the highlight of an Interpol gig is the suits.
Not the music. Well, Graham, is that a fault of the lighting designer, or is that a deliberate decision by Interpol to decide that to put themselves in the shadows and not to even to reveal whether they're besuited, and lessening your besottedness with them in the process?
I think it's partly that. I mean, red is one of their colors. Black and red's one of the colors on their album sleeves.
Yeah, it
At least
is
one of the two.
consistently.
But I think it's also that these days the audience wants some interaction with the band, and
Mm.
if they just stood there in clear light, aloof, in black and grey suits and open neck shirts,
Mm.
it would be a bit icy. whereas the red gave it some warmth,
Warmth.
and it created some sort of like rapport with the audience in a bizarre fashion. So I don't know if that was the reason, but that's what came across to
I
me.
mean, it's a familiar color on stage, red, used by Jesus and Mary Chain, of course, regularly, and indeed they used it then on sleeves of singles and albums consistently. But it's also the color of blood. It's the color of the heart. It's the color of warning. It's the color of danger. It's the color of traveling fast. A lot of things that are connected with the color red. It also means stop rather than go, of course, which is its one down point. But when it's being used on stage, I think it isn't just bringing out what that thing of casting warmth. I think it brings plenty of different emotions into play. And it does have the effect of blurring what you're seeing. But as I say, I think it does often represent a warning, maybe a map of a pumping heart or whatever. It is. I suppose I'm saying it can be a disturbing color.
Yeah, you're right, but I think it's more important the fact that it actually hid the suits. And suits have a long and important role in rock and roll and in rock bands, even in recent years. And so to hide their suits, I mean, maybe they didn't have their suits. Maybe the suits were in dry cleaning. They were just there in t-shirts, and they thought, "Oh my God, we need to cover this up. What can we do? Oh, dry ice, red lights. Oh, that's fine. Nobody will know we're not wearing suits." Could have been that, I suppose.
So if we talk of suits in rock and roll, let's mention. Okay, I'm going to just throw a couple in.
All right.
Talking Heads and Graham
Stop
Parsons and
making.
Graham Parsons and his nude suits. There will
Yeah.
be
Well,
there will be
they was
two suits I straight away think of off the cuff.
they are different types of suits and serve a different purpose than Interpol suits because both Stop Making Sense with Talking Heads and David Byrne
Mm,
and Graham Parsons and the Flying Burrito Brothers in his nudie suit. They were both a bit outlandish, a bit over the top, a bit outrageous, and those sort of tied into the early years of rock and roll when Little Richard would wear massively big loose suits,
yes.
and and it was all a bit flamboyant and a bit loose, and that's what came across in those two. Then again, you got suits like Sinatra and Tony Bennett would wear in the 50s and 60s, and they were all very neat and tidy to show they were professional, serious performers. And also the fact they quite often performed in cabaret and supper clubs where people
Mm,
would be dressed in suits themselves. So that's sort of suited to not mean to pun anything. Then you had the Beatles and the Mods and the Who, early Stones. They again had buttoned up little suits to show they were
yeah.
modern. They weren't flamboyant. They weren't loose. They were tight. They were organized. They meant business, but they were still sort of cool.
Mm,
Those aren't the sort of suits that Interpol wear either.
no.
Interpol wear the sort of suits that started coming into fashion in the 80s, runners or Robert
Mm,
Palmer,
yes.
which is the sort of suit that suggests business-like qualities. You know, we come from a sort of successful background, perhaps even business, but we just happen to be using guitars and happen to be singing songs. But we could be business people. We're that sort of successful person. But we don't wear ties because ties imply we're going to work, and we're not going to work. You know, we're on stage being a rock band, so we need to have
Mm,
open neck shirts, which is exactly what Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds started wearing
yes.
in the mid 90s, and to a degree still do. It's exactly what the National still vaguely wear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's even, you know, it's a sign of classy rock and roll, mature rock and roll, adult rock and roll that isn't uptight because it's not going to be buttoned up. It's not going to be shirt and tied. It's going to be like a bit loose. And I think that Interpol belonged to that sort of side of wearing suits as a band.
Where would they fit in with perhaps the finest exponent of wearing a suit on stage, David Bowie?
Yeah, he was one of the ones in the 1980s who pioneered the return of proper suits with
Yes,
the Sears Moonlight tour and the era of Let's Dance.
exactly.
You're right. He started wearing posh proto yuppie suits quite early on. I'd
Mm,
forgotten that.
mm. Or Annie Lennox wearing suits.
But she was a bit androgynous deliberately so during an era when sort of bisexual pop in Britain was
Yes.
starting to like make a real impact, which is part of the reason that 80s British pop had such a big cultural effect in America, probably bigger
Mm,
than Britain, because
mm.
being bisexual in America is a hell lot bigger deal than being bisexual in Britain.
Yeah, yeah. What one can say is that the suit has always been important in rock music. The decision whether to wear it or not. So the Wombles obviously not wearing a suit. but wearing Wombles
Well,
suits was a very different version of wearing a suit.
well, they were all furred up, weren't they? Completely furred up.
Well, they they were. Then you'd have
Oh,
your very
yeah,
very bright coloured suits, or and obviously you have your time when flares were in. I mentioned Bowie, but I mean, Brian Ferry again, a man who never knowingly not suited, would be
that's true.
absolutely
He was
part of
also,
any performance
again, he
that
was
he
part of that
does.
80s rock move towards suits amongst a
Mm.
more adult middle of the road rock. But I've also remembered another more modern band who also tend to wear slightly loose suits with open neck shirts, Fontaine's DC.
Yeah,
And they do it for the same reason as Interpol do in the National, to show, yeah, we're a rock and roll band, but wait a minute, we're also quite mature and serious. We're not like frivolous. But wait a minute, we're not too uptight. We don't wear ties. We don't button up. So they
mm.
have it always.
I mean, you get a fashionista like Kevin Rowland who goes through myriad different phases of how he dresses, and of course, famously went through the phase of dressing in suits, having gone the complete opposite of that with a raggle taggle look for
Mm.
the for the second album and Tu Raye, whereas by the time of the third album, immaculate American prep style suits, a very deliberate decision. I think maybe that goes back to your point of the businessman, that smart look. This was serious business, going from deliberately looking very scruffy and run down, having initially gone for
It's, yeah.
the boxers running on the rivers, running on the canal side at Birmingham look as the first look they had.
Well, you're right. And I think also he wore that sort of suit very preppy as a
Mm.
rejection of rock and roll cliches of being
Yes.
loose
Mm.
and rebellious
Mm.
and rock and roll, basically.
Mm.
You know, he's saying I'm not rock and roll, even if I do rock and roll, which is a
I mean,
typical
it's
Kevin Rowland thing to do.
it's the statement, isn't it? When one thinks back to ABC wearing gold lame in a direct reference to Elvis Presley wearing the
Mm.
gold lame on one of his album sleeves, and ABC took that look. I mean, they were suited and booted from the very start of their successful period, but went into suddenly wearing the lame as a kind of further statement within that.
Yeah, well, rock and roll stars are always playing about with fashion
Mm.
in a quite sort of like complex way. So, in the film Performance by Donald Cameron,
Yes.
Nick Rogan, well, it was made in 1968, but it came out in 1970. The
Mm.
star Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, in one scene when he sings Memo to Turner, which is a sort
Mm.
of fantasy scene, he's dressed up largely like a sort of like the 50s rock and roller or a serious businessman with his hair slicked back. And it's like a conscious rejection of what the Rolling Stones were. And
Mm.
when Johnny Rotten, when he was in the Pistols, started to go around not wearing punk gear, he started wearing 50s teddy boy drapes.
Yes.
Again, it's like a shock tactic to show, I'm not going to be bound by the cliches of rock and roll by wearing what you expect me to wear. I'm going to
Mm.
look back to something else that is no longer fashionable. And I'm going to wear it because I'm wearing it. It's going to look great.
I mean, one can think of the New Romantics who decided, right, punk looks scruffy. We're going to be the reverse of this. We're going to look immaculately sharp. And you could go as far as Spandau
Mm.
Ballet with their tartan suits for a while. Malcolm McLaren played on that as well, didn't he? Not the contrast between how he dressed the Pistols to further looks that he went for that were
Mm.
much more formal. I mean, it is as much obviously the ultimate importance is the music, but presentation, the look is always going to be, and the change of look as well is a big part of a statement. Madonna, again, has worn suits sometimes, again, to make statements. Often suits are used in that way. They are
Mm.
announcing maybe a change, maybe it's something more serious, maybe an artistic statement, and that's often been the role of the suit. And likewise, again, whether it's double breasted, whether it's striped, whether it's plain, whether it's a summer look, whether it's a winter look, been a consistent and very powerful tool within rock.
Yeah, but which comes first? Is it the culture and the economy that influences rock and roll? Or is it rock and roll that influences the culture and economy? So if you look at how Duran
Mm,
Duran and Spandau Ballet were dressing by about 1984, 85 in
yeah.
proper suits, you
Yes.
then look at the films like Wall Street by Oliver Stone, which came out in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Films in the late 80s were portraying yuppies And the yuppies in those films were wearing the same sort of clothes that Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran were wearing 4 or 5 years earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, they feed off each other clearly, but often the fashion trends are set by the musical proponents who go for a more exaggerated version of a look that then passes down into the high street in a more commercial way. That's been a familiar route, hasn't it?
I think where pop music and rock music in terms of fashion leads to ways when it transgresses, when it picks up on a style which is not fashionable, in which in some way is an insult to somebody or something. And at the time, it comes a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, because it has been a shock, slowly a bit at a time, everybody else picks up on it, and eventually it becomes a fashion. Whereas before it was a statement.
What about when a band changes its look and everyone thinks, nah, they've got that wrong?
Well, most bands, if you look at how they evolve, even in the period of 10 years' time, whether they're like a small band, a big band, a really famous band, the only moderate famous band, there's scarcely been a band in history, apart from maybe the Ramones, who didn't change how they looked in terms of their haircuts and their clothes in the space of 10 years. I think musicians don't like to be left behind by any trends until they get to be either very secure or much older. And at that point, they're happy to like settle for being vague themselves and not chasing after the next new thing. But in the early years of any band, they don't get left behind by anything. So they do tend naturally to change how they look and how they dress, which I find quite annoying because some bands' best look is their first look. And then they go and ruin it by changing. So I remember that band Palma Violets, who were a short-lived but fantastic live band when I first saw them. Sort of like a punky Libertines influenced band, but about 10 years ago or more. And when I first saw them, they were wearing sort of like 60s like mod or Beatles jackets, tight trousers, and they were ferociously energetic and sweating and leaping around. And it was like seeing Dr. Feelgood on speed.
Yeah.
And then I saw them 2 or 3 years later after they'd had some success. And they were all wearing loose trousers and slightly more Interpol type jackets. And the lead singer was dressed in some sort of, I think it was an early 70s floppy hat. And I thought, you just look terrible now.
It's you get obviously bands like AC/DC who settle on a look, Kiss, a more extreme example. Early Split Ends wearing makeup. Actually, they by the end came out of that makeup look, and that was almost inevitable, I guess, at some point. But bands who do stick to a look, like Kiss or like AC/DC, from what you're saying, Graham, you actually would prefer that is the case. That's what's made them distinctive. Stick with that look.
Well, those are also bands that didn't really change the style of songs or the sound of the music they were making.
Exactly.
And if you have a formulaic sound that you've created yourself, and it's a great formulaic sound which has massive worldwide success, it then behoves you to stick to the uniform that works with that sound. I mean, if your sound changes, so for example, the Beatles sound changed so much between 63 and 67, which is great. That's one of the great things about them. But if they'd kept on wearing mock top suits from 1963 or 64 in 1967, it just wouldn't have gone with the music.
It would not. It would not.
If your music's not going to change, you don't really need to change how you look, especially if it works.
Last question on this, Graham. Do you have a favourite suit in the history of rock music?
I like Little Richard's in The Girl Can't Help It film when he's battering the piano and he's wearing this very loose suit, not quite as big and loose as David Byrne, Stop Making Sense, but with his pompadour hair and his wild eyes in that loose suit, and he's leaping around. He just looks fantastic.
I think that's a really good call. I'm not even going to argue with that because it just comes straight to mind what you're describing. And that's the test of it as well. If you can conjure that image, you know that it's stayed through time and that it has its special place. Well, I never thought we'd necessarily discuss suits in rock music, but it suits us for a discussion. I think it's time for an interruption, Graham, if you fancy one.
Well, you know that Bob Stanley, the great songwriter of Saint Etienne and the great music book writer as well, he's got a new book out about the Bee Gees called Children of the World, and he's a great writer. And I met a few times. He's a really nice bloke.
Yeah.
But I was in Harrogate Town Centre the other weekend,
Hmm.
And Harrogate bid the Business Improvement District mob, who tried to encourage footfall in Harrogate town centres to the shops, which is a big deal in Britain these days with the
Yes, it
problems
is.
on High Street. I think that they'd actually hired a Bee Gees tribute act to sing songs a cappella on the streets of Harrogate, and they were singing "Staying Alive," and they were singing like "I'm going nowhere, somebody help me." Just round the corner was a homeless chap sitting there begging,
Oh
and
gosh,
I
yeah.
thought, I don't think this guy wants to hear them singing "I'm
No,
going nowhere,
no,
somebody help me."
no,
So I didn't know what to do in that situation. Maybe
no.
give him a Bob Stanley book,
Yeah, don't
perhaps.
don't give him a Bee Gees album. That wouldn't have helped in that situation. But all he was keen on there, Graham, the need to stay alive, and one,
Exactly.
you're going to do that in Harrogate. Well, I think there's probably more chance of doing that in Harrogate than there is in some places. So yeah, well, so Bob Stanley, impact on Harrogate continues there. So Graham, now I don't know about this film at all yet. I've not even seen a trailer for the Italian film The Eight Mountains. That's
Mm,
EIGHT mountains, not
mm,
someone having a
mm.
strange Toblerone addiction and eating mountains of Toblerone. The question that is to be asked here, given that it's won awards, does it actually live up to that title, The Eight Mountains? Does it really hit the heights, or in fact, is it something of a disappointment and an avalanche towards crashing to the base?
You've used too many mountain puns there for sure,
I
Charles.
did. I did.
Way too many. Yeah. But yeah, well, the thing is, as you know, I think it's been a disappointing year for films, although there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of good ones coming out shortly.
Yeah.
But in the context of the first pretty rubbishy first half of the year in terms of new movies, The Eight Mountains is actually a good film,
Mm.
and in some ways it's a great film. But it's set in the Italian Alps, absolutely stunning Italian Alps, and it's a sort of an Italian film that's based on a best-selling Italian novel by Paolo Cognetti,
Mm.
but it's directed by two Belgians, Felix van Groningen and Charlotte van der Marsch. Or something like that. I've probably got that entirely wrong. And it's obviously subtitled, which doesn't never bothered me at all. Even as a
No.
kid, I didn't mind subtitles. And it's got a solid story that's like the story of two young boys who are from completely different backgrounds and who've got very different types of fathers called
Yeah.
Pietro and Bruno. And they only meet in the summer when the wealthier one comes from Milan with his parents to live in this sort of like shack in the mountains and have a great summer. And they become friends. And the film's about how the friendship changes, how they grow old, how they grow mature, how they get married or not married. And then they keep on meeting up over the years as these different developments happen. And it's all about can they still be friends?
Mm.
And then it develops into like, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of change? How has their respective fathers affected their whole personality? Can they shake loose the chains of that fatherly influence, which is in some ways has harmed both of them, although in different ways?
Yeah.
And so it's all a good solid story, and it looks gorgeous because of the stunning Italian Alps. But before the end, I realized that even though it's a good film, it isn't quite good enough.
Where's it failing?
Well, it's won awards. I mean, it won the jury prize at Cannes last
Yeah, it
year,
did.
so
It
it's
did.
highly regarded, and it's the sort of film that if you and me saw at the Edinburgh International Film Festival, we both enjoy because it is
Yeah.
basically a good film. I think
Yeah.
the problem is that it aims to be deeply philosophical and existential, and it aims for something beyond just the story of two boys and the various troubles throughout their lives and their friendship. It aims higher than that. But eventually, the only thing that is higher than that, the basic storyline, is the scenery. There isn't there isn't actually any more depth to the story than is in the narrative. And what lifts the film up beyond just being basically a bit of a soap opera or even a children's story in some ways is the scenery, which gives it a lot more spirituality than the story itself really has.
Is this one of those occasions again where maybe maybe the script writing is not as strong as the source novel
No, I think they thought, well, if we have this strong storyline and we chuck in the strong scenery,
scenery? Mm.
yeah, the result is greatness. And it isn't quite, because I realized also that almost every great film that's ever been made has individual scenes that are stunning to look at with memorable dialogue and great acting. so that years later you remember 2 or 3 scenes, you go, yeah, that bit was brilliant. There's not a single scene in the Eight Mountains that is memorable. Every scene is perfectly fine, perfectly well acted, perfectly well. The dialogue's perfectly fine the whole time. There's no clunky bits. It does work, but none of the scenes are classic scenes. So apart from the actual mountains themselves, there's nothing classic about the film.
So it's not a film that's climactic. It doesn't do what mountains do, go higher and higher.
Well, no, you enjoy it, and
Yeah.
and it's fairly absorbing, and it's a little bit thought still. What really sticks in your head afterwards are the mountains, not the 2 kids that the
So you
film's
could have watched
about.
a National Geographic film and perhaps been equally associated by that experience of watching the glorious
I
Alps.
think I think it's akin to like take the cast of Coronation Street,
Yeah.
then plonk them in the Italian Alps, and that's what we get.
I'm just trying to imagine where was it called Weatherfield?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you
It's
imagine
in
Roy
the
in the Alps?
So, where did you see the Eight Mountains? Was that one of the joyful everyman
I
experiences in Harrogate?
actually went to City Screen in York for a
Oh, you
change.
went to City Screen to see it.
Mm.
Oh. Was it
I think
a
there's
kind of?
about I think there's about 20 people there. 25 is a reasonable
Oh,
turnout for an
yeah,
afternoon for an
yeah.
Italian film made by Belgians.
And that was a Sunday afternoon film, yeah.
I think so, yeah, if I remember correct.
Well, which
Which I
has
mean,
used to be a Graham Chalmers and Sarah tradition at City
well, yeah,
Screen.
but then City Screen turned into the sort of art house cinema that doesn't show art house films enough times for me to go.
Well, I mean, you have to just keep an eye out for them. It's they are still there, but they're perhaps more of a challenge than they used to be to find. Sometimes they still do seasons, Graham, of international films.
I've noticed, yeah, yeah. I know it's still a good cinema, but
Yeah.
in its early years when it first opened, as you will remember as well,
Mm,
it
mm.
was predominantly an art house film with the occasional mainstream movie, and that
Yes,
sort of balance did shift.
it did. Now, Graham, I guess one of the big talking points in rock music this week has been what rock music is. This came about because of Royal Blood, the Brighton duo of Mike Kerr, singer, guitarist, and drummer Ben Thatcher. They have had 3 number 1 albums,
Hard to believe.
which is more a statement, I think, actually, of the state of rock music than anything else, that they've had 3 number 1 albums, but they have. Anyway, they found themselves on a bill at the BBC Radio 1's big weekend festival in Dundee. On the bill as well, Lewis Capaldi, Wet Leg, Niall Horan, and Anne Marie, and there was the band Royal Blood, who weren't going down as well as they might have liked, shall we say. And he ended up calling the crowd pathetic, exited the stage, middle fingers in the air, flipping the bird, and mocked the audience for not knowing who the Royal Blood were. I wouldn't be mocking the audience for not knowing who Royal Blood were, because I think an awful lot of people don't know who Royal Blood are, despite having 3 number 1 albums, and they will be playing Glastonbury Festival. But it's led to a series of memes about this is rock music, featuring any number of things that aren't rock music, that imagining that it could be rock music, so it could be the Smurfs or whatever. And I think he's ended up going on Greg James's show on Radio 1 about a week after this happened, and said it was his dry humor. He described his humor as being dry as MDF, which actually a medium density
Well, he's
fiberboard.
claiming I was only joking card.
It's the
He's playing that
only
card.
joking bit. But
Oh
of course,
dear.
I think the songs are more likely to be about as dry as MDF. And he says he's not done anything morally wrong, which is a little bit unnecessarily over the top as a reaction, I think. I don't think anyone is saying morally that he should be castigated for
Yeah,
saying what he did.
he's not facing criminal charges either, so it's a bit
Well,
of
of
a
course
top.
not. I mean, he said he was being performative, basically doing a performance. At this performance, he felt a little bit out of place. Well, I guess with Lewis Capaldi there, and with Marie there, and Niall Horan. But I would have said that Radio 1 was trying to go for a balanced lineup. And the fact is that perhaps Royal Blood were just boring. Perish the thought that they might just have
Yeah,
been
there's
boring.
also the problem that there is no mainstream now. I mean, and there's no TV shows which bring all the music strands together, and there's no Top of the Pops, and later is only watched by a small minority of people.
Yeah.
So to the vast majority of people who get their music these days through Spotify or some other form of
Mm.
streaming, would have a clue Raw Blood are,
No.
because Raw Blood are like from the last years before streaming became completely dominant.
Yeah.
So I can see why people in Dundee didn't know who the hell were. I don't dislike Royal Blood in general. They're perfectly fine. Loads of energy. They sort of like steal a bit from Led Zeppelin, steal a bit from the White Stripes, steal a bit from Queens of Stone Age. They're perfectly serviceable. They're not inspirational. They're no
Excellent
AC/DC.
description.
They
Perfectly
don't,
serviceable.
yeah, they don't do any classic songs, but they're
Like
not
a
a bad band.
Volkswagen.
Yeah, they're not a bad band. And as for that tosh about it was just a bit of a performance or a joke,
Mm.
well, unless the whole thing's a stunt to get publicity, which in rock and roll you never can quite tell, well, that's absolute patent nonsense because they're not that sort of band. They're not like the Sex Pistols who would go on stage to goad the audience to get some sort of violent reaction. They're raw blood. They'd rather be popular and have #1 albums. So
Yeah.
I don't believe that at all.
He said he found himself being in the position of a professional wrestler doing that, calling out thing, or or playing the pantomime villain. But I think this is all afterwards. I think it was a genuine hissy fit that he
Yeah,
was without any wit surrounding it whatsoever.
yeah,
And
agreed.
it wasn't even playing the thing of trying to provoke an audience. Like if you remember when we saw Iggy Pop trying to get the audience
Yeah,
worked up when we saw him at a Leeds festival, and that was performative. But at least there was some. I did feel it was performative, but with some kind of genuine emotion behind it, because he was just
yeah,
trying
it's
to get people
part of
going.
his thing.
But this
I
chap
mean,
does at the end of the show. He's about to leave the stage. He leaves the stage with flipping the bird, and that leaves him nowhere to go really, because there's no comeback from that. That
I
seemed to
think it
be
was basically,
pointless.
yeah, I think it was basically the rock and roll version of, do you know who I am?
He did actually do exactly. He did exactly. He did ask,
Yeah.
do you know who we are? This is Ben. He's the drummer. This is rock music. How many? How many know what music is? And he says, oh, about 9 of you. So it was much more the kind of hissy fit one might have expected
Yeah, that is
from
so uncool. I mean,
from
yeah,
no one turning up at a book signing or whatever.
it'd be like a musical act turning up in the 1930s
Yeah.
on the set of like Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant and going,
Mm.
do you know who I am? Do you know this isn't proper comedy? What you're doing isn't proper comedy. How can you possibly like that sort of stuff when I'm your genuine musical act?
It's provoked discussions as well about where this leaves. Why is rock music seen as the one that's serious and pop music is seen as not serious? Why is rock music, therefore, now in this case being very po-faced? And why does rock music think it's more important than pop music when pop music right now is the thing that is selling, far outselling rock music?
Yeah, but reality TV shows like Love Island get huge audiences doesn't make them aesthetically or
Ah, now
artistically good.
you're going down the line, Graham, that Royal Blood wants you to go down.
No, I'm going down my own line, but if that happens to be the same as Raw Blood, I don't mind. I'm not trying to be anti-Raw Blood. I'm not going to give Raw
No,
Blood
no,
the
no, no.
bird.
I mean, is it right
I mean,
though that
basically,
rock music should be
rock
taken more
music,
seriously than pop music?
rock music's basically a steak, and pop music's a packet of fruit pastels.
But sometimes you need fruit pastels.
Well, yeah, I'm not against fruit pastels, and some of
No,
the
and
greatest rock and
sometimes
roll
steak is
bands.
unpalatable and leaves a bit feeling a bit heavy on the stomach.
Most of the greatest rock and roll has had elements of pop in it, and
Exactly.
sometimes great pop has elements of rock and roll in it. It just depends what the act to like wants to do with it.
Yeah.
There's no strict in general in rock and roll history and pop music history over the last 60 years. There's been
Mm.
no cut and dried segregation between the two. I would say there's more segregation now because streaming rewards only things which get a big audience very quickly, and a
Which
big
is
audience
pop.
tends to like sweeties. They don't want something you have to chew on
Yeah.
or
Snap,
think about
crackle,
for
and
very
pop,
long.
Graham. The very
Yeah,
originality of pop.
no matter how good it is. So it has created more segregation between the two things. So
Mm.
perhaps the Raw Blood scenario is a result of the digital world creating greater barriers between mainstream music and other forms of music.
I mean, I think the position of superiority rather requires the music to be better than Royal Blood's music is.
Yeah, but Yeah, there's great pop, there's good pop, there's average pop, there's boring pop.
Yeah.
There's great rock, there's good rock, there's average rock, there's boring rock. The quality differs from genre to genre. It's not a
Mm.
genre-based thing. Quality isn't defined by genre. It's about
No.
how well you do it. And the big difference between rock and pop is that rock is fundamentally based on a riff, and
Yeah.
pop is fundamentally based on melody. Now, of course, even melody in pop is really based on a riff. But what pop music does with the riff is they hide the thread beneath lots of effects and lots of poppy moments and lots of
Mm.
melody. So you're not always
Mm.
aware that there is a riff driving the song. Whereas rock goes, we're not hiding the riff. Okay, we might have a little bit of a chorus or a little bit of like a catchy bit, but wait a minute, the riff's the star of the show, and we're going to have bits where it's just that riff. And that's the fundamental divide between the two. But of course, all the great acts know how to play that game and how much pop and how much rock to make. Like the Beatles could do both at the same time because they were immensely skilled at arranging songs.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub production.